It's a pleasure to welcome to studio Dan Perry, International Affairs Analyst and the former Europe and Middle East Editor at the Associated Press, and Security Analyst Jonathan Regev. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for being here in studio. It feels almost counterintuitive to talk about a ceasefire when we're also talking about explosive drones, rockets, and security zones. Dan, your take on what is unfolding on the ground and diplomatic efforts to try and sort this situation out.
It's clearly, at best, a partial ceasefire, and it only existed because of something that you could say is an origin in sin, which is that the Iranians insisted on a ceasefire in Lebanon if they were to enter talks with the U.S., which they then did not enter in good faith. So what are the Iranians going to do if the ceasefire ends? Are they going to walk away from talks that they effectively already walked away from? The Iranian zone has a current dynamic, which is largely oriented towards the blockade and smoking them out. The Lebanon zone is something else altogether. And as regards that Lebanon zone, it's incredibly helpful and useful that the government of Lebanon appears to be on the side of, well, A, rationality, B, Israel, C, the interests of Lebanon, which are to get rid of Hezbollah. The Israeli buffer zone is aimed at preventing infiltrations from Lebanon, which are a very huge danger. But were never the main thing. The main thing was rockets, and rockets they can fire from further north. Israel has no intention of occupying all of Lebanon. Lebanon wants to disarm Hezbollah, but for the past year and a half, apparently has proven it cannot. And therefore, these talks happening under U.S. aegis with Lebanon are incredibly important. And today, Joseph Owen defended those talks, saying that they're being done with the acquiescence of the Speaker of the Lebanese Parliament, Berry, who is Shiite and who is semi-aligned with Hezbollah. These are all really, really good signs. And it comes down to something pretty fundamental. Lebanon can't do it, but they want to do it, and they should want to do it, because Hezbollah makes a mockery of the state of Lebanon, and therefore they got to ask for help. And if they don't want Israel's help, and indeed Israel doesn't want to have forces on the ground in the north of Lebanon in the Bekaa Valley, it's going to have to be some other form of help. And of course, then you start entering scenarios that seem unlikely, like Europeans or Americans or Syrians, and there's a lot of tension in Lebanon about the possible involvement of Syrians, but it has to be someone. Otherwise, Hezbollah will continue to exist. So Israel's chief of the military can say all he wants that they won't tolerate attacks. All they can do is strike back. Hezbollah has shown that it's resilient enough to be able to tolerate Israel's, even the most clever and impactful of Israel's retaliations, like the Beeper operation, like the decapitation of its leadership. And so I think Lebanon basically has to ask for help, and the world has to treat this as an international problem, much as the world indeed is not eager for another Middle Eastern quagmire. Hezbollah can be defeated, given the recent years' changes, given that they no longer have a weapons superhighway from Iran through Syria, but it's going to have to be a force more profound than merely that of Lebanon.
Who else could realistically help, Jonathan, in terms of disarming Hezbollah over and above the IDF?
Realistically, I think there are two powers that could perhaps do it. The United States, which is, of course, the major superpower, and France, simply because France has its own interests in Lebanon, and also has its own, I would call it, sympathy for Lebanon. All that is true, but I'm not seeing any of them rushing in. And if you tell any American or any French that they should come into Lebanon and assist, they will remind you that back in the 80s, there were hundreds of Americans and of French soldiers killed in attacks carried out by Hezbollah. So France, for example, which I really believe that has a lot of good faith and good hope of solving the situation, of taking Hezbollah away, I think they're much more comfortable in sitting in Paris and saying that Hezbollah should demilitarize and Israel should not strike in Lebanon.
Yes.
All that is true, but someone has to do it. France, I think, would be a good option. I don't see them doing it.
What about their foreign legion, vaunted, famed in song and story?
Very, very nice. Very nice. Do you see them coming in? Absolutely.
They've done stuff in Africa. By the way, the U.S. And France, when they had troops in Lebanon in the 1980s, and they were killed in Hezbollah attacks, basically suicide bombings, but they weren't killed in fighting. We're talking here about a massive force of 50,000 soldiers that has to enter the Bekaa Valley and take out these criminals. And that's a different scenario than the West and Lebanon has ever agreed to do.